In its 80 plus years of existence, Detective Comics has transformed from a pulpy crime anthology series into the now beloved secondary title for DC's poster boy. Through the decades, the pages of Detective Comics have provided audiences with genre-bending moments, character-defining stories, and enthralling mysteries. There is a seemingly infinite number of Detective Comics stories to enjoy. However, in the series' ever-expanding mythos, it wouldn't be until 2021, 82 years after the series' debut, that history would be made with Mariko Tamaki's ongoing Detective Comics run. That is because Tamaki's 29 issues of Detective Comics was the first time in history that a female author would write an ongoing Detective Comics run. I recently picked up and read Tamaki's Detective Comics, and I gotta say, it's a damn shame it took so long. Tamaki's Detective Comics is a enthralling deep dive into the streets of Gotham, focusing on the gritty underbelly of the city. It's a run that strips Batman down to nothing but the essentials, and it's one of the most underappreciated contemporary Batman stories. So join me in this video as we take a spoiler-free deep dive into Tamaki's Detective Comics and discuss why it is the Detective Comics run that made history. But before we dive into the comic, let's first discuss the mind responsible for its creation, Mariko Tamaki. Tamaki is a Canadian writer who's been working in the comics industry for over a decade. However, prior to writing comics, Tamaki was a novelist and a performance artist whose pieces were centered around topics like feminism and the queer experience. Point being, before entering the world of comics, Tamaki was well researched. Her work experiences show she had a deep understanding of the hierarchy of oppression and how the intersection of class, race, and gender relates to all of that. These ideas would be commonly expressed in both her novels and comics. Oftentimes, her stories would center around female and or queer protagonists, navigating a world where institutional forces of patriarchy, classism, and social stigmas inhibit a character's ability to thrive and truly be themselves. For example, 2008's Skim was Tamaki's first published comic. It was a short story following a young girl in an all-girls Catholic school who struggled to fit in. This was a deeply personal story that centered around themes of social alienation and mental health, and those two ideas would be a reoccurring theme in Tamaki's later works. In the mid-2010s, Tamaki would go on to write stories for both DC and Marvel, including titles like Supergirl, Being Super, X-23, Wonder Woman, and more. But then in 2021, Tamaki found herself in the midst of what is perhaps one of the most asinine controversies in comic book history. In 2021, Tamaki wrote a book titled I Am Not Starfire. It was a young adult graphic novel focused on showcasing the struggles of Starfire's teenage daughter. The book explored topics of mental health, social isolation, and the struggle of living up to the expectations of your parents. The book was obviously geared towards the young adult market. It featured themes that I'm sure many young kids and teens relate to. A lot of young people are bullied. A lot of young people struggle to fit in with their peers. A lot of young people have complicated relationships with their parents, and a lot of young people suffer from body image issues. This book was an attempt made by Tamaki to capture the hormonal roller coaster of young adulthood and package it as a out-of-continuity DC story. Sounds harmless enough, right? Wrong. For some reason, the comic book community and the internet as a whole banded together to rip this book to shreds. Anti-woke comic book content creators launched disgusting and hateful comments towards Tamaki. Other critics freaked out about the out-of-character representation of beloved heroes like Starfire, and generally the internet was essentially bullying Tamaki for the book. It was insane. I wasn't actively reading comics when this controversy happened, but somehow the discussions surrounding the book reached into the mainstream, and even I found myself seeing tweets and Instagram posts posts that were hating on the book. In retrospect, the campaign against Tamaki was unfair and cruel. Tamaki wrote a book for young adults, particularly young girls, and it was a out-of-continuity story. But for some reason, a bunch of angry, middle-aged white men took offense with the story and berated Tamaki with vicious and personal attacks on her character, acting like she was besmirching the mainline continuity of DC. Criticism is important. We are all free to express our opinions about art, but in the same vein, it is important to recognize the target audience. Maybe, just maybe, if you're a middle-aged man, you don't need to read a young adult novel that's obviously catered towards teenage girls. And if your response to disliking a book that's made for teenage girls is to throw hateful comments towards the author, you're just a bad person. Despite the controversy and unjust hostility geared towards Tamaki, DC Comics didn't budge. Instead of listening to critics and benching Tamaki, DC editorial took a big swing. In 2021, shortly after the release of I Am Starfire, Mariko Tamaki was given the opportunity to write an ongoing Batman title within the pages of Detective Comics. And so, in March of 2021, Detective Comics issue 1034 was released, written by Mariko Tamaki, with art by Dan Mora. If you're a comic book fan, you'll probably recognize the name Dan Mora. His art style is instantly recognizable and insanely popular, so much so that Dan Mora's cartoonist aesthetic has arguably transformed into the norm for what people expect DC Comics to look like in 2026. But Tamaki's Detective Comics, all the way back in 2021, was actually Dan Mora's first credit as an ongoing illustrator for a DC title. And when you read this book, you can tell. Dan Mora's artwork in this story is some of his best DC work ever, at least in my opinion. The art here feels like it was drawn by a hungry artist who was always putting his best foot forward in order to prove himself. But that's enough context surrounding the run. What is Tamaki's Detective Comics, and what makes it so special? Well, ironically enough, the first thing that stood out to me about this book wasn't even Batman. It was actually Huntress. Detective Comics issue 1035 and 1036 feature backup stories that follow Huntress. If you're unaware, Huntress is an extended member of the Bat family. She is a vigilante who fights crime in Gotham and works closely with characters like Barbara Gordon and Batman. Like I mentioned earlier, this video is going to be spoiler free, so I'm not going too deep into the plot because this whole run is great and everyone should read it for themselves. But the ideas explored in these issues pose a simple question. What does it look like for a vigilante to build a relationship with the community they aspire to save? When we think about street level heroes, we often think about people who fight crime, violence, action, fistfights, drug deals, bloodshed. These are the ideas commonly associated with vigilantism. But what about community? Heroes like Batman work to save their community. This is a given. But what about the bonds that these heroes form with their community? We know vigilantes have a psycho-spiritual affect on the soul of the city. Whether folks are in favor of Batman or against Batman, the looming ever-present panoptic force that is Batman influences the psyche of Gotham's citizens. But what about the interpersonal relationships? Batman saves people. He meets hundreds, if not thousands, of citizens a year. What do the material relationships between a vigilante and a citizen look like? That is the question Tamaki answers in these issues, except instead of using Batman, she addresses this dilemma through the lived experience of Huntress. In these two issues, we follow Huntress as she fights crime, but notably forms a relationship with just an average citizen known as Mary. It's a ridiculously simple pitch that almost sounds boring. This is a story about two women building a friendship with each other. One is a crime-fighting vigilante, and the other is a citizen with a boring 9-to-5 job. But it's the simplicity of this relationship that I found compelling. Heroes are a spectacle to behold. They're mythical, godlike figures who come soaring down from the sky, saving the day with their skillful displays of aerobatics and combat. Superhero comics feed you action, so this issue was a surprising but well-needed change of pace. It highlights the monotony of the superhero lifestyle, and it humanizes the experience. In addition to that, these issues also cover more nuanced perspectives. Obviously, Huntress is a female hero. She is a woman who suffers from the same stigmatized biases that any woman suffers from, but the cape, the cowl, and her status as a hero gives her power in the face of patriarchy. Her friend, Mary, doesn't have any of those things. Seeing the drastic juxtaposition in their ability to express themselves makes this feel like a short but razor-sharp commentary for how violence towards women can manifest in different ways. If a thug sees Batman standing in the shadows, they'll wince with fear and try to run away. If a criminal sees Huntress, a lot of the time, they think they can take her, up until Huntress breaks their bones and leaves them demobilized. It's not that different from how if Mary wanted to walk the street alone at night, violent criminals might take advantage of her because she is a seemingly small, petite, and feminine target. The inclusion of these examples in Tamaki's story feel intentional, especially given her previous works. But if you're not looking for that subtext, I don't think you'll see it. It is what makes this such an ingenious story. Tamaki is telling the reader, at least in my opinion, that a petite and harmless woman who walks the street alone at night still faces violence, the same way a skilled female martial artist would. Institutional violence towards women doesn't discriminate, no matter how prepared you may be for it. But on top of that, there is a deeper commentary about the tragedy of senseless crime found within the gaping hole of chaos that is the streets of Gotham. And that is the other reoccurring motif throughout this run. The underlying idea that Gotham is a gritty and grimy place that forces the people in it to roll around in the mud, aristocrats and drug dealers alike. And that is the exact theme covered in the next arc of this book, known as The Neighborhood. But real quick, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. It goes a long way when it comes to helping out the channel. Anyways, The Neighborhood is a 6-issue arc that follows the events of James Tynion's Joker War. Spoilers for Tynion's run, but at the end of Joker War, Bruce Wayne ends up losing his status as a billionaire. Now, he still has money. He's not poor in the streets begging for change. Matter of fact, he's got enough money to live out of a brownstone in the middle of a very nice neighborhood in Gotham, but it's still an interesting change of pace. Bruce Wayne has neighbors. He's lost the Batcave, and he's forced to become a leaner and more tactful Batman, as every Batarang counts. What's also great about this story is that it starts out as most great Batman stories do, with a murder shrouded in mystery. A rich socialite who lives in Bruce Wayne's neighborhood loses their life, and thus Bruce Wayne has to deal with the stress of living next door to a woman who was murdered. The grief and anger brought forward because of her death is constantly in the vicinity of Bruce, and some people don't trust him either. He just moved in there and a woman dies? That seems a little sketchy to them. But then on top of that, we also get some really fun Batman detective work. Some of the best Batman murder mysteries are the one in which Bruce Wayne is working on a case that feels personal to him, and this case is very personal, as it happened to his next door neighbor. The community Bruce Wayne is a part of, or to be blunt, the community Bruce Wayne rapidly attempts to assimilate into, is what makes the start of this run interesting. Bruce Wayne is a master of manipulation. He can flip the switch in an instant, crack a smile, and smoothly talk his way into the hearts and minds of his peers. But he's always had the ability to do that with the reassuring fact that he can slink back to Wayne Manor at any moment to return to a state of isolation. Any social contact or emotional support he needs comes from Alfred. In this run, Bruce Wayne has neither of those things. The emotional support of Alfred is gone, and the place he returns to after a long night of crime fighting isn't hidden away from the rest of civil society. Rather, a disgruntled neighbor has the ability to knock on his door at a moment's notice. The new scenery, the change of pace, and the social environment Bruce Wayne is forced to adapt to all breathe fresh air into Batman's life. Tamaki's Detective Comics is the first time in a long time reading Batman that I felt excited by a new status quo. Batman lost his money in Tynion's run, but the Tynion run and the Zdarsky run that followed don't really do anything with that. Tamaki's Detective Comics is a masterclass in how you adapt and explore interesting concepts like that one. In addition to having to deal with his neighbors, the material conditions of Batman have changed as well. Batman is lurking in the tunnels of Gotham, setting up makeshift outposts while hopping in and out of manholes. These are small moments and simple concepts, but little plot beats like this constantly remind you about how Batman's position has changed. He's no longer a billionaire who can purchase millions of dollars worth of equipment to pursue his projects. Instead, he has to work with the limited resources he already has, and the constant pressure of trying to pursue the smartest and most efficient outcome is something you feel when reading this run, especially when threats are escalating but Batman's toolbox stays the same. Outside of Batman, Tamaki uses the upper class backdrop of Bruce's neighborhood and his aristocratic neighbors to pose deeper questions about class consciousness. As mentioned earlier in the video, Gotham is a hedonistic mistress who grabs you in your darkest moments and finds a way to drag you down even deeper to her level. The aristocratic type who live in Bruce's neighborhood are some of the privileged few who believe their access to wealth, status, and security guarantees them some basic privileges that others in Gotham don't benefit from. But the murder of one of their own in the place they call home shatters that reality and forces them to reconsider the safety of their ivory tower. And then on top of all of that, there is an underlying political mystery that slowly unravels alongside the murder case. The newly elected mayor of Gotham hates Batman. He doesn't want vigilantes to exist, so there's constant tension between Batman and the institutional powers that be. But even the mayor, someone who's supposed to stay in his office and draft legislation, finds himself wrapped up in a murder conspiracy. And just like that, everyone is dragged down to the same level. Bruce, Batman, the aristocrats, and the mayor are all rolling around in the dirt, floating from one place to the next, realizing that the indiscriminate nature of violence makes any of them a potential target. This arc contains a cacophony of characters, attitudes, and thematic ideas that constantly keep you at the edge of your seat. But at its core, this arc, in my opinion, is about how material wealth divides us, but the ground in which you lay your feet on is shared by everyone else around you. And I think Tamaki is trying to tell you that it is invaluable to remember that shared connection with your peers. After this arc is concluded, we get moments that reflect that underlying sentiment as well. We see stories where Bruce Wayne talks heart to heart with a drunken man in jail, reminding the reader the value in moments of simplistic connection. We see the mayor fall underneath the city when trying to escape from attack, meaning literally and figuratively, this elected official has to navigate the underbelly of Gotham while paddling through the rot and filth that hides in the sewers. One reoccurring threat in the later issues is an infectious fungus. When this fungus reaches its host, it sends them into a violent fit of rage. Metaphorically, a reoccurring theme Tamaki explores is how indiscriminate violence is. But now, literally, Tamaki materializes these ideas with the fungus. And the irony is that the only thing Batman can do to combat it is to use his fists. It's a perpetual cycle. But then in the middle of the series, we get a fantastic issue that explores the systemic failings and successes of Gotham by analyzing the city through a Hippocratic perspective. And that is found in the pages of Detective Comics Annual 2021. This issue is a prelude to the upcoming 12-issue Shadows of the Bat storyline found in the later half of Tamaki's run. The issue opens up in a very familiar way. We lay witness to a young Bruce Wayne eating ice cream with his parents when, out of nowhere, a crazed lunatic jumps out of a window brandishing a knife in front of the Waynes. At first, one might roll their eyes, as this setup feels like it's about to be yet another rehashing of Bruce Wayne's darkest moment. But instead, Tamaki subverts that expectation and shows us a scene in which, prior to approaching the Waynes, a piece of glass falls, slicing the criminal's throat open in front of Bruce Wayne. Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne's father, who is also a doctor, steps in to stop the bleeding and save this man's life. This is the first time a young Bruce Wayne questions his father about ethics and responsibility. Bruce heard from the cops that the man his father saved killed 2 people. Bruce is confused why his dad would save a murderer. Thomas Wayne's response to Bruce's Bruce's moral dilemma is simple. I don't choose who I save. That's not how it works. I save the victim in front of me. Thomas Wayne's loyalty as a doctor is to the Hippocratic Oath. And in this moment, a young Bruce Wayne confronts the idea that it's not a public servant's responsibility to judge. It is their responsibility to help, no matter what. That is a beautiful sentiment that is centrifugal to the philosophy of Thomas Wayne, Bruce Wayne, Batman, and it's also the thesis statement for what a better Gotham looks like. There have been plenty of times where authors write stories in which we see the traumatic impact the loss of Bruce Wayne's parents had on him, but very rarely do we get to see stories where we see the positive imprint Bruce Wayne's parents have had on him. It's a great play by Tamaki, and it flips the script, wherein the project of Batman is no longer defined by the memory of Thomas Wayne. Rather, it's defined by the memory of who Thomas Wayne saved. Combine that with the notion that the man who Thomas Wayne saved was a criminal, and it recontextualizes the idealistic commitment Bruce has towards the preservation of life. In addition to that moralistic commitment, the other thing Bruce Wayne so desperately yearns for is rehabilitation. Bruce doesn't want to beat people up and send them to jail. He wants to help them, to make sure that they have the means to live a better life. Enter Arkham Asylum. Arkham Asylum is the embodiment of rehabilitation in Gotham City, except it never does that. Rather, it is a building that is seemingly cursed. It's sick to its core, and that sickness plagues the inmates that go there. Arkham Asylum has failed consistently, and thus the hope of rehabilitation dies a little with each of those failures. And that's the idea that leads us into the next arc of Tamaki's run, the Tower. The Tower is a 12-issue arc centered around the history, the mystery, and the progression of a brand new fixture in Gotham City known as the Arkham Tower. The Arkham Tower is supposed to be a new rehabilitation center that focuses on restorative justice, rather than the traditional penalty-focused approach to medicine that Arkham Asylum seems to be known for. There's hope baked into the message of Arkham Tower. What I also like about this concept is that it allows for Tamaki to ask deeper questions about Gotham and its inhabitants. Gotham seemingly never changes. Rather, the issues in the city continue to escalate as the years go by. Crime tends to be the frame of reference we use when discussing the morbidity of Gotham, but rarely do stories go deeper than that. The Tower is a story that asks questions about mental health, forcing readers to reckon with the idea that Gotham has failed its people in terms of how it approaches restorative justice. On top of that, it also utilizes different members of the Bat family to showcase how the city of Gotham has failed all of them. As, to be honest, the mental health of the Bat family has only deteriorated through the years because of the conditions Gotham breeds. And yes, I said the Bat family because this run focuses mostly on how the Bat family operates around the Arkham Tower, and I find that shift of focus to be compelling. Particularly, it focuses a lot on Huntress, who is a character Tamaki built upon earlier in the run. But in the Tower, the audience gets to understand Huntress on a deeper level, as Tamaki explores how and why crime fighting comes with a significant psychic toll. And then, on top of all of that, we get a solid mystery here. The Tower storyline is very ambitious. I appreciate how Tamaki centers the narrative with a metatextual focus on mental health via the perspective of both vigilantes and criminals. Covering this topic by using the Bat family was another welcome change of pace, as truthfully, stories about Batman's own internal struggles feel all too familiar at this point. However, if you're disappointed by lack of Batman, don't worry, because the issues that transpire right after this arc feel almost antithetical to the Tower storyline, as they come across almost like a back to basics approach to Batman. And that of course happens in the arc titled Riddle Me This. Riddle Me This is a 3-issue story that first takes place in the pages of Detective Comics 1059. Issue 1059 first came out in April of 2022, which is important to note because Matt Reeves' The Batman film came out a month earlier in March of 2022. I think that's important because the Riddle Me This storyline follows Batman as he uncovers a series of mysteries that are all connected to the Riddler. There is an explosion in a courthouse. A lot of corrupt government officials are being murdered, and additionally, Batman's boots on the ground detective work in these issues are almost rudimentary. He's walking into crime scenes, staring at bodies while the police are there next to the caution tape. The visual aesthetic and the tonality of the writing almost feel emblematic of Matt Reeves' film, and I can't help but wonder if that was intentional. Was someone at DC telling Tamaki to write a story that felt like the movie in order to synergize with the hype surrounding the movie? Or was all of this just a happy coincidence? Tamaki wrote a boots on the ground detective comic story featuring Batman hunting down the Riddler. I don't know the truth, but what I can tell you is that it is a genius move. If I watched Matt Reeves' Batman and wanted to read Batman, and so I went into a comic shop in 2021 and picked up this issue, I would instantly want to read more. Tamaki captures the gruffer and more realistic Batman vibe that Reeves goes for effortlessly. All the while, the story, the plot device, and the visual aesthetic mirror the film, but the plot twists are unique enough to keep any reader on their toes. And these issues made for a nice addition in Tamaki's overarching Detective Comics run. But unfortunately, these would be Tamaki's final issues of Detective Comics. But if you read this in the Omnibus format, this isn't Tamaki's final story, because after this, there is a series of issues called Future State, Dark Detective. If you're unfamiliar, in 2021, DC launched an event called Future State. It was basically an issue-wide event that lasted for 2 months, in which DC put all of their mainline titles on hold, or I think almost all of them, and instead used the Future State books to explore potential possible futures for the DC universe and its characters. Dark Detective was one of those stories. In this book, we see a world where Bruce Wayne is dead, and a privatized police force known as the Magistrate has taken over Gotham. The art in here is really good, and the look of this dystopian cyberpunk Gotham is breathtaking. Narratively, I don't really remember much, but what I do remember is that there is a privatized police force that teams up with billionaire tech companies to launch intrusive surveillance campaigns on every single civilian in Gotham. I thought that was nuts. I can't fathom a future where privatized companies team up with law enforcement to spy on law-abiding citizens. That is just so dystopian, man. And Gotham's supposed to be in America too. Like, America's the land of the free. Billionaires and the cops would never do that, especially in America. And this concept is genius, dude. Like, I don't know how she would ever come up with something so innovative, futuristic, and unpredictable. And it's also just terrifying too. But like, thank God this is fiction, right? Thank God. Jokes aside, it's pretty decent, and it's included in the Omnibus, so I wanted to touch on it. But that about covers Tamaki's Detective Comics. At its core, Tamaki's run is about taking Batman and other members of the Bat family and connecting them to the socio-economic roots of the city. Bruce has to hang out with millionaires instead of billionaires. He's forced to build DIY Bat caves. Characters like Huntress are shown to be heroes and also victims of Gotham's indiscriminate wave of violence. And even the villains are humanized in the way Tamaki shows them to be deeper reflections of Gotham's systemic failings. Gotham is imperfect, and no matter how rich or how poor you may be, Gotham will fail you. But the point isn't to stew in the trappings of defeat. When you do that, you'll just continue to fail. In a metatextual way, when you think about Tamaki's past, this run feels reflective of her own journey. Tamaki was failed by the comic book industry. She released a book and was harassed and bullied for a harmless project, but she never lingered in that failure. Rather, she picked her head up and kept working, making an ingenious Detective Comics story for the same comic fans who ridiculed her. Why would she do that? After comic fans and journalists and trolls treated her so poorly, why would she continue to put her best foot forward and create something incredible for them? Well, Thomas Wayne puts it best. I don't choose who I save. That's not how it works. I save the victim in front of me. And maybe, just maybe, if one hateful person reads Tamaki's Detective Comics and resonates with the deeper themes found in this run, that might be a victim saved. But have y'all read Tamaki's Detective Comics? What do you think of it? Let me know down below. And if you want to get a book like Tamaki's Detective Comics Omnibus, make sure to check out the channel sponsor, panelboundcomics.com. It's a website where you can get collected edition comics for up to 50% discounts. You can use my code YooHoo on checkout to save $2, or you can use my code YooHooShip to save 5% on an order of 4 or more books. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I will see y'all in the next one.